The views and opinions expressed in The Fact Is with Hollis Grant are those of Hollis Grant and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Droids Canada Network. Droids Canada Network does not take responsibility for any content or position produced by Hollis Grant and his show. Listener discretion is advised.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you for tuning in to another edition of The Fact Is. I'm your host, Hollis Grant. There has been so much happening in the news today. If you're watching anything in the mainstream or legacy media, you know all about the UFOs that are being reported. You know everything that there is about China, about Ukraine, about Russia. But what you're not hearing about is the Nord Stream 2 pipeline and the explosion of that. And some preliminary investigations have been completed, and it looks like that it might not have been the Russians that blew up that pipeline. Waiting for further information and further clarification to sort of talk about and go into depth about that particular topic, because right now it's all hearsay. But we're not going to be talking about UFOs. We're not going to be talking about Russia and Ukraine. We're not going to be talking about Justin Trudeau. We're not going to be talking about COVID. What are we talking about this week? Well, it happens to be a story from Ontario, Canada. And our good friend, my friends, Doug Ford. Doug Ford was in the news. This is a story from February 10th. But it was quickly out of the news cycle because UFOs, John Tory, the mayor of Toronto, while telling everyone to stay home and lock down and make sure that you social distance, was having an affair with a 31-year-old staff member. He was caught, and he since has stepped down, somewhat stepped down, not officially stepped down, apologized, but not really apologized. The standard story of these politicians. So Doug Ford skated through this particular story without any mention in the news cycle. And what is it that Doug Ford happened to do? This particular article is from taxpayer.com. And again, it was from February 10th of 2023. The Canadian Taxpayers Federation is calling Ontario Premier Doug Ford to stop a pop can tax that will hit Ontario taxpayers on April 1st, 2023. No, this is not an April Fool's joke. It is a tax on pop cans. Quote, with soaring inflation and high living costs, the last thing Ontario taxpayers need is another tax, end quote, said CTF, Canadian Taxpayers Federation, Ontario Director Jay Goldberg. Ford is allowing the Canadian Beverage Container Recycling Association to nickel and dime hardworking Ontarians. Now, we haven't talked about the economy on this show. In all of our episodes, we have left that out. The rising inflation, the rising interest costs, the high unemployment, the inconsistent messaging coming out of the White House about those numbers, and the same thing in Ottawa, where a government is completely silent about overspending and printing money. But the Canadian Taxpayer Federation to note that soaring inflation and high living costs. According to the Toronto Star, a left-leaning organization, very left-leaning, they are anti-Ford, we could say. They don't like conservatives or right-wing groups, so they're never going to favor Doug Ford. So, of course, it's going to be a negative piece. However, according to the Toronto Star, the Ford government's new recycling policies permit the Canadian Beverage Container Recycling Association to impose a recycling fee on cans and bottles holding non-alcoholic beverages purchased by Ontario consumers. The tax will be between 1 and 3 cents per can or bottle. Now you might say it's only 1 or 2 or 3 cents per can. It's not a big deal. Let it go through. It's a penny per can. Yes, it's a penny per can, up to 3 cents per can. But what the tax does is any tax that's now on the books, it never goes away, because income tax was put into place to raise funds for World War II. And it was only a temporary solution, and then to end that tax once the war was done. But it never happened. It's never gone away. And it keeps on increasing year over year. So now that you have this pop can tax, what might be 1 or 3 cents today, and in 5 years, maybe 5 or 10 cents. This is a money grab, pure and simple, said Goldberg. While other provinces have a can and bottle deposits, this is akin to a tax because consumers have no way to get their money back. Ford is allowing large corporations to impose a punitive new fee on Ontarians, with the corporations getting the financial benefit. Now, there's an article from the Toronto Sun, again from February 10th, where they go into a little bit more detail, and they talk about or speak with Gary Wheeler, a spokesperson for the Ontario Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks. Now, here's what he said. The province's new blue box regulations will save municipalities $171 million in annual costs, adding up to over $1.6 billion over the next 10 years. Our government is not imposing any new taxes on consumers, Wheeler said in a statement. The reality is that expenses associated with the recycling cost taxpayers millions every year. Last year, they spent over $168 million to cover costs that the large corporations who produce this waste should ultimately be paying. Ken Friesen, executive director of the industry-based Canadian Beverages Container Recycling Association, said in a statement that the container recycling fee is charged to beverage producers who have discretion over how or if it is passed along to retailers. Retailers may then choose to pass it on to consumers. If producers and retailers follow what has been done in other provinces, then the CRF will be reflected on checkout receipts beginning on April 1st, 2023, the Friesen statement said. It's important to note that the container recycling fee is charged to beverage producers. It is not a tax levied by the government. Fees range between 1 and 3 cents depending on the size of the container and the net cost of recycling the container's type. The Ford government is allowing the Beverage Association to be the bad guy here. And that's from Goldberg. Again, it's the same quote. In this case, you're paying for it, yada, yada, yada. So on one hand, you have the government saying, well, no, it's up to the manufacturers to see if they'll pass it on to the retailers, and the retailers will then essentially pass it on. But it's no new tax. It's just a fee. It's a fee, a recycling fee, but it's definitely not a tax. So what's the difference between a fee and a tax? Let's look at the dictionary definition of a fee. 1, a payment made to a professional person or to a professional or public body in exchange for advice or services. 2, an estate of land, especially one held on condition of feudal service. That doesn't apply. So back to 1. They were faced with illegal fees of $3,000. Or you could say they were faced with a 3-cent fee for buying a can. Now, what's the definition of a tax? A compulsory contribution to state revenue levied by the government on workers' incomes and businesses' profits, or added to the cost of some goods, services, and transactions. To impose a tax on someone or something. Hardware and software is taxed at 7.5%. So a cost of some goods, services, and transactions. A fee and a tax are the same thing. In this case, you're putting a fee for the cost of recycling that the government's paying for to recoup some of its lost money. Yet again, politicians using language to mislead public and mislead the voters, the citizens, and misrepresent themselves in this case. So Gary Wheeler, the senior media spokesperson for the Environment, Conservation, and Parks, who makes $108,762 a year, is going to tell you the difference between a tax and a fee. $108,000 a year to be a spokesperson, paid for by public funds. And you're going to take the 3-cent fee, and there's nothing you could do about it. Because, my friends, if you're upset at a time like this, you need to sit down in your kitchen and make a cheesecake. Fine words from our Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford. When things go wrong, get in your kitchen and make a cheesecake. I'd like to thank you for tuning into this edition of The Fact Is. Enjoy your pop cans. You have a month before the fee kicks in. As always, feel free to reach out to us on all of our social medias. I'd like to thank you for listening to The Fact Is. I'm your host, Hollis Grant, and you have yourself a wonderful week.
Hi, this is Hollis Grant, host of The Fact Is. You can find us Wednesdays on droidscanada.com, where we discuss current affairs from around the world.